quotes, infused with the scent of potpourri, the films we commit to memory. Crossing the felt ropes, watching from home on my TV, looking at all my eyes can see. They tell me I view obsessively.
Hello and welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. We're a weekly podcast that reviews one or two new release titles every episode with an occasional free-for-all segment at the end that we call Potpourri. You can find more of our work, including my written reviews, full episode show notes, and the complete backlog of our episodes at obsessiveviewer.com. You can also write into the show by emailing me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And if you'd like to support us and get access to hundreds of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you can get access to content at any of our tier levels on a recurring monthly subscription basis, or you can buy individual collections a la carte in the Patreon shop section. You can also buy those collections for a one-time fee and then get access to anything that goes in those collections as well. So I am starting to do video immediate reaction recordings, I think. So I have a collection for that, so you can pay like an upfront fee for that and just get access to that. There's also Stephen King stuff, science fiction stuff, like collections. So like you pay the fee, you get the access to what's in there, and then you get it replenished anytime it comes up. So that's at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and you can find me on social media, including Letterboxd at Obsessive Viewer. And this is a bonus episode, and all we're going to be doing is talking about the docudrama, The Speedway Murders. And to do that, I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Tiny, who can be followed on Letterboxd at the username of ObsessiveTiny. And we share a very interesting connection to the Speedway Murders. We both graduated from Speedway High School. We both lived in Speedway. I lived in Speedway. Tiny still lives in Speedway. So we've got a lot to talk about in this. Tiny, how's it going? And yeah, how's it going?
It's going good, man. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Been a little while, and
it has.
Yeah, I know. I didn't even think about, you asked me about my T-shirt, and I was like, I didn't even think about, like, we're talking about Speedway Murders, and I'm wearing a Speedway Sparkplug shirt. Like, it was totally unintentional, and like I understand now why you asked me.
Right.
I'm so dumb.
No, not at all. Also, I like the thanks for having, like, this is your show too. Like, I'm not like I don't, yeah, like this is our show. We're good. Like, I'm not
That's
having
true.
you on. We're doing this together. But I will say, just to peek behind the curtain, we are recording this a little bit in advance because I'm not going to post this until November 17th in honor of the anniversary of the Burger Chef murders. That's the subject of this documentary. So that's why I didn't give really a rundown of stuff I've done recently on Patreon, because in my timeline, or in our timeline, I haven't done them yet. So yeah, so that's a needless peek behind the curtain. But it has been a while since we've talked on mic. Tiny, how have you been? How's life been, and what's been going on, and how's Speedway, to tie it back to the documentary?
Right. Yeah, life's good. Really busy at work. And busy with the baby. It's kind of it's kind of a bummer, you know. Everybody talks about how fast it goes, and like, you'll never get this time back, and you just really don't get it until you're there. And I was finishing up my leave, and I was like, I'm literally never gonna have this time again. Like, it's bittersweet, you know. Like, I'll have, like, you know, a week off with her, 2 weeks off with her here and there for vacations and stuff, but like 6 weks, don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah,
never going to happen again, and like, ever. And I'm just like, that's just nuts to think about. So but I am glad to be back at work. It's a bummer because she's a late sleeper, man. She'll sleep until like 8 o'clock.
Oh, nice.
And I'm usually out the door by like 6:30, 7 in the morning, so like I never see her in the mornings.
Yeah.
And then I pick her up a lot of the time, but not every day. You know, 5:30, and then she's in bed by 8. So it's like, it's kind of a bummer. Like, I just get a couple hours with her every day, if that. And if I have to work late, like, there were a couple days last week where like I came home and said goodnight to her for 10 seconds, and that was all I got to see of her that day. You know, it's a bummer.
Yeah.
But, it'll get better, you know.
Oh yeah. And like, I'm sure you have like your weekends, like your days off that you get to spend time with her. So I know that that's not like any, like that's not the same or anything, but it's fortunate that you work in a place that allows you to have the 6-week parental leave.
Totally.
So that's really good.
Yeah. But no, life's good. Yeah.
Nice.
Looking forward to holiday season coming up. And, Halloween tomorrow.
Yes.
Excited.
Yeah. So I'm going to tie this back to the Speedway Murders a little bit, sort of, because like Jess, my friend Jess, she used to, like, she did briefly a true crime podcast that I was on to talk about the Burger Chef murders. She doesn't do that anymore. Like, that was kind of a fleeting thing, but she has an orange cat named Clarence, obviously, like everyone knows that now. But creepy as it is, like, as like someone who, like, I'm still close with her because we dated for like a year, a little over a year, and now we're just friends. It's often remarked in my brain that, like, oh, I talk for my ex-girlfriend's cats all the time, which is creepy behavior. But Jess has, like, she's going into the office tomorrow on Halloween, and she's dressing up as the Joker. And so she, like, I got in my head that, like, Clarence doesn't understand what Halloween is, but he knows and loves Christmas, which he calls Christmas. So I just imagine him running around saying, like, Happy Orange Christmas. It's so dumb.
Oh my
so
God.
Very dumb. I'm so sorry.
Only those cats knew what you do to them.
Oh, yeah, they know. they know. they know. But yeah, so anyway, Orange Christmas is upon us, and we watched the Speedway Murders. And like I said, we're releasing this on November 17th to commemorate the anniversary of the crime at the center of this documentary. And there was something else I was going to say about that, but I can't remember. Oh, I will say, just another plug for Patreon. Patreon did get access to this episode early, so consider signing up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer for more early access stuff, as well as new content and exclusive content. But Tiny, I alluded to it or referenced it directly, I don't know, before, but we both grew up in Speedway, and you still live in Speedway. So I'm trying to figure out how best to transition into the review and talk about the Speedway. So let me go ahead and give an outline of the Speedway Murders. The Speedway Murders is a documentary that came out June 21st, 2024, and is now on VOD and Hulu. The premise, according to IMDb, follows the unsolved Burger Chef murders of 1978 that claimed the lives of 4 teenagers in Speedway, Indiana. A writer and director for this documentary were Adam Kamian and Luke Rinderman. And it's a unique documentary in that it has, like, the standard, like, talking heads and documentary style things, but it's interspersed with these narrative, like, fictionalized versions of people involved in the case that are, like, they're like interstitials of, like, dramatizations. So the people playing the 4 victims in the film are Essie Randalls as Jane, Joseph Zada as Dan, Davida McKenzie as Ruth, and Naya Kofi as Mark. And we're going to talk about this documentary, but I think it's important for us to really kind of give some important context, since we are very much closely tied to this documentary, and to kind of bring us into that section of it, which I will also say we're gonna spoil it, I guess. Like, this is gonna be a spoiler review. I'll play a clip from the trailer before we get into the actual, like, review portion of it. But if you're looking to just know, if you're looking to this review to just know, like, oh, should I check out this documentary, and you don't want to know, like, the ins and outs of it, just watch it. Like, spoiler alert, we both really enjoyed it. I loved it. Tiny loved it. Watch it and then come back and listen to our discussion about it. So having said that, Tiny, the context. we're both Speedwayans, spark plug-ins, spark plugs. Yes. I'm an absentee spark plug now that I live outside of Speedway, but you are in the heart of Speedway. So I don't know, like, do we talk about our lives in Speedway? Like, I don't know. What do you think about the context?
I think what we can bring up is the fact that, you know, when we were growing up, this was like, I didn't really know about this, you know. Speedway is a very safe town. There's a murder like every 20 years. Like it's not like people get killed here all the time, or you wake up to gunshots or anything. So it's kind of odd that, it's odd that even that something this heinous and mysterious kind of crime was even happened in this town. And it was, you know, it happened amongst other things as well. There was the whole bombing thing that was going on. Like it was just a really strange time. I'm a member of the Speedway Lions Club, and I'm the youngest person by far in the club. And one of my friends, a fellow Lion, he was in high school when this was going on.
Wow.
And he talked about how everybody was just like, you know, what, like, is Armageddon, is the end of the world happening? Like, how is all this bad crap happening at the same time? And he was like, it was just weird. Like, it was just he said it was just a huge distraction. Like, there was the missing kids from Burger Chef, and there were the bombings, and everyone was worried about bomb threats and what was going to get blown up next and targeted. And it was like, he was like, you know, we didn't really think about it back then, but it was kind of like terrorism. It was like the town was being terrorized and everybody was afraid. And he was like, it was just weird. Like, it, you know, nothing like that had happened before, and nothing's happened like that since. And it's just kind of weird. It's just weird that this happened in this town. That's, you know, I mean, we're famous. It's a very famous town, but not for something like this. You know?
I know. And obviously, for context, you're alluding to the fact that the Obsessive Viewer podcast was started in Speedway.
Right. You can come see our plaque in the middle of the town.
Yes.
We don't have a plaque.
No, we don't. Not yet. Not yet. That is so interesting that, because I've talked to like a few people like about, like, mostly just about Indianapolis in 78, like tangentially, like people who were alive then and like knew about like the goings on of it. Never like people like that were directly like lived in Speedway or anything. But I'm going to ask you like when the first time you heard about the Burger Chef murders was, but I'm going to go first. 'Cause like, I feel like there's some interesting context for me, from my own perspective on this, because I wrote it on Letterboxd, but basically the way that I phrased it was like, most of my life has been spent in Speedway, Indiana. And in high school, I remember, like, I think it was junior year of high school, we had, like, during one of our free periods called Prime Time, I didn't have anything to do. So I was looking through old yearbooks that were on the shelf in the classroom. And like, I opened up like the 1978 to 1979 school year yearbook. And like, they had a whole big like center page thing that was commemorating the victims of the Burger Chef murders and the Speedway bombing, like kind of chronicling that. And I was like, I had no idea that this happened. Like, this is, at that time, it was like 2003. I had lived in Speedway for like, I don't know, like a decade at that point. And like, I had no idea that this was a thing, that this happened. And like, then, like I said on Letterboxd, fast forward like 7 or 8 years, you and I were night shift security guards, and we were in our early 20s. I was bored as hell. And this is pre-podcasting, pre-Obsessive Viewer. And like, I was like, I need something to occupy my time. And I got in my head this idea that like, I want to write a book about 1978 in Speedway. And like, I don't know if you remember this, Tiny, but like for like a year and a half, I would like get articles and like get notes and everything and put them all together. And then because I'm Matt Hurt and because I was Matt Hurt in his 20s, it just kind of petered out and I never followed through on it or anything. But I will say, like, I studied this, not only this case, but like the events of 1978 in Speedway, Indiana. And like, yeah, it was weird, man. Like the beginning of the year was the famous blizzard of 78. And then September, there was the bombings, and that not like going back to July, there was the murder of Julia Cyphers, and then the bombings in September, and then the Burger Chef murders in November. Like my kind of point of entry for what I would have written was like how just frantically terrifying this time must have been for the citizens of Speedway, Indiana, and the surrounding areas as well. But yeah, so like I dove so deep into this, and I still have like a file folder with like copies of newspaper clippings, some of which were in the documentary, and like outlines and timelines and all of these things that I was working on. And like, it's just so interesting, not to make it about like, oh, my perspective on this or anything, but it's also so slightly surreal to see such a, like it's an incredible documentary, like visually, like the filmmaking wise, it's incredible, but it's so surreal to see this depicted and see like places we've been, like the town that we've lived at, like Speedway in a movie. It's so surreal to me. So I don't know, that kind of leads me into asking you, like, did you ever think that we would be covering, like, is this the culmination of the Obsessive Viewer podcast where we are reviewing the Speedway Murders?
Yeah, this is it's meta for sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess there was the documentary we watched about safety at the, like this, all the changes to safety with IndyCar racing that started, but that wasn't really about Indianapolis. No, I mean, it focused on Indianapolis a lot, but and the Motor Speedway a lot, but this has the title, and they're not talking about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. They're talking about this town when they say the Speedway Murders. So yeah, I mean, it's really it is pretty surreal, definitely very meta, and this is kind of I don't know. I guess meta is the best word. But yeah, pretty cool. And I just now remembered your whole plan to write a book. I kind of forgotten about that. Did you like file something with the county or the state to like get records?
Yes and no. So I in retrospect, I feel so bad. I didn't, like, I called like the Indiana State Library, like the central branch, and like I had this very sweet woman who was willing to basically pull every newspaper clipping that involved the Burger Chef murders and the Speedway bombing in 1978. And like, I had like a ton of documents there. And I had also submitted a Freedom of Information Act request, naively so, to the Indiana State Police, which I think could not have been fulfilled because it's an open case. Like there was, I don't think that, I think I got denied, but I think that's the reason why. So I did, like, I was taking it seriously, and then, it just didn't happen. So
yeah, well, that's a huge undertaking. So
it is. And like years later, I looked at it again and I was like, I was almost ready to start like writing it, but also I wasn't, because here's the thing. Also, this was my early 20s, and it was like, I'm afraid to talk to people. I don't like I'm afraid, like, this is not, I didn't do any interviews or anything. And I was like, I think that was the big thing where it's like, if I really am going to do this, I'll have to start reaching out to people and researching who to reach out to. And I think that's where I was like, I can't, not yet. So, but that's not like a woe is me thing. Like what I will say, and we'll get into the review here in a moment, but what I will say is that I am like, with the rise of true crime, like true crime has become like a huge thing since, I was working on this thing. It's blown up into this huge thing. Things like Red Ball, which is the document or the podcast series that is all about the Burger Chef murders, and this documentary, it's just, I'm very thankful that these things exist. Because like, if I wasn't going to write the book about it, I'm glad that someone has documented it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm like, that's fine. It's fine that I never finished it or never followed through on it, because people who can devote much more attention and much better attention on it are making these things for people to get the word out on these victims and on this case. So I am fine with it.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
They did a good job. So
yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the documentary. Anything else tangentially about like just our connection to the subject of this?
I don't think so. No, no, not really.
All right. So shall we dive in to the documentary, The Speedway Murders?
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm going to play a clip from the trailer. When we come back, we're going to be talking all things The Speedway Murders. Again, it is available on VOD and on Hulu currently. So here we go.
On November 17th, 1978, 4 employees of the Burger Chef restaurant in Speedway, Indiana were abducted.
The bodies of Jane Seafried, Mark Flemons, Daniel R. Davis,
and Ruth E. Shelton have been discovered late this afternoon.
You're supposed to find the bad guys. That's the way the movie's supposed to end.
All right, so let's talk The Speedway Murders. Again, we're going to just basically be spoiling this documentary. So if you want to go in fresh and watch it, go watch it and come back and listen to this review. But Tiny, yeah, what did you think of The Speedway Murders? How'd you feel about it?
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I gave it 4 stars out of 5. I think I expected to go in and enjoy it just because, like, ooh, I've been there,
Right.
Like that's where I'm from.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured there was going to be some bias there. But I think the movie totally stands on its merits, just objectively. Like I was so impressed with the creativity of how they chose to depict this mystery. They cast these actors to play these roles, and then they kind of, it's not breaking the fourth wall, but they like stop their acting and discuss the details of the case and the questions around the case, and like, wait, this doesn't make sense. Next, my character, or like next, Jane does this. So why does that make sense? Or that pokes a hole in that story. And like, that was so creative. Like I was so impressed by that. I don't know that I've ever seen that from another documentary before. And it was just super effective. I thought it was such a good way to tell this story and depict the mystery. I'm a big fan of a talking head in a documentary. I like to see establishing shots and a talking head. Like that gets me every time, but every documentary has it. And there's not a ton of creativity there. There's not a lot of room for a filmmaker to play, but with this dramatization, blending it with these questions and filming it that way, it was just so clever. Just such clever creativity that like totally had me hook, line, and sinker. And I absolutely love that. And like, I wonder if this documentary is catching the eyes of a lot of other filmmakers around the country, even the world, just because of how well it's filmed. Yeah, I mean I was blown away. I mean that's the only way I can put it. And then in addition to that, I think they did a great job of doing all their research and trying to cover all their bases, talking to everybody and blending all these stories together from all these different people. And then, there's there's a pretty big ending there that I didn't expect. Pretty shocking ending to everything. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'll put it this way: I don't know how this documentary could be better. Like I'm really impressed in so many ways. They did not fumble one part of this documentary. It's all stellar and exemplary and just really cleverly made. I'm so impressed by the documentary. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, wholeheartedly agree. I rated it 5 stars, and it brought me to tears. Like I was weeping in this documentary because it, like here, like to backtrack a little bit. When I first found out about this movie, I knew that it was a docudrama. I knew that there were going to be dramatizations in it. There was going to be a narrative aspect to it, and I also knew that like the filmmakers like are like from Australia, and it's like their first feature length film, and I'm like it made me a little bit cautious or a little weary, thinking that like, okay, people from like very far away from Speedway are making a docudrama about this crime and having it have reenactments in it. And like, I was worried that like, and this is maybe a weird protectiveness that I had, like, this is the wrong attitude to go into it. But like, I was like, what makes like, how is this the documentary that's going to be made about this? How is this going to be, how is like this version of this story, like my thought of it, how is that going to be the prevailing documentary of it? Like it doesn't, the pieces didn't make sense to me that it would have dramatizations. Like I was expecting like a talking head documentary, but watching this movie, I was so blown away by the care and the just gentleness and the profound nature of those narrative moments. So like partway through the movie, I'm thinking like, first of all, the production design is immaculate. It is honestly, it's incredible. And those narrative moments where the kids are in the burger chef, and it starts with them just closing up for the night, and then as the documentary progresses, they start breaking the fourth wall and addressing the camera, saying like, well, this theory doesn't really jive with this because I was doing this at this time, and my brother was doing this at that time, and this is the way it actually was. And then when it gets to the point where they are working together and looking over notes from the case of people's like testimonies and witness accounts and everything, I just had, like, I'm getting chills saying this now, but like, I had this just overwhelming feeling that this is the perfect way to tell this story, because it is giving a voice to the voices that were silenced 46 years ago. And there is such a level of profound beauty to that it makes me feel like, it makes my heart swell a ton to know that like the filmmakers behind this are clearly like caring caregivers of this story and of this event, this tragedy, this horrific event. And like for them to do it that way, like it's on one hand, it's telling us the information, it's delivering the information, but it's delivering the information in a way that is keeping us in, like keeping the victims at the forefront. It's not a sensationalized true crime story where it's like, oh, this guy went to prison for bombing a bunch of things in Speedway. Did he kill them? It's like, it's just a gradual just examination of the different theories and the different theories presented. And it doesn't give you a direct answer, but, and we'll talk about that ending, like the ending scene. I was like, this is incredible. Like just like the visual of like the entire movie, the narrative pieces are them in the burger chef. It's isolating. It's alone. It's dark. It feels kind of a purgatory-esque sort of sort of environment, and then like that last scene where it shows what could have been, what should have been, them leaving and going their separate ways and going home. Like I just felt this overwhelming like sense of not closure or anything, but just honoring of these kids and what could have been and what should have been, and just like leaving on that note, and not like a sensationalized, like the killer's still out there or we'll never know what it is. Like having that moment visualized is like such a heartfelt, wonderful, poignant, and just beautiful sentiment to leave on. So I know I was all over the place there, but like I thought this was just the perfect way to tell this story and to package these details for the audience.
No, I think you're pretty on point there, actually.
Nice.
I think it's amazing you had that much of an emotional reaction to it. That's really great. I didn't, and I'm not trying to devalue what you said, but just didn't have the connection to it. Honestly, I've not spent time thinking about this case. Don't know why. I enjoy the shit out of true crime. I'm not obsessed with it the way a lot of people are, but I really like it. But for whatever reason, I have not pored over the details of this case and looked for books or articles about it. I don't know why. And I should. But obviously you have, and you had this emotional attachment to it, and the fact that they gave you this film gave you that kind of reaction speaks volumes to how well it's filmed, and how well done it is. But your thoughts kind of made me think of another fact that I didn't really bring up. I feel like this case I feel like it's not something that looms over our town. You know, I feel like it's not something that like, oh, we heard about this when you were growing up as a kid, and you know, it's nuts to me that it was never like a rite of passage to go break into the old Burger Chef building,
right?
You know, for dumbass teenagers in Speedway. Like it was absolutely like we never thought of that we never gave that building a second thought,
right? When
we were growing up as kids, and no, to my knowledge, no other teenagers did throughout any other generations growing up in this town. And, you know, I had never heard about it until I think you started looking into it when we were in high school. I had no clue this was even a thing. And so it's a little odd that it doesn't loom over the town, and it's not something that, you know, we have a memorial to. There's no people don't talk about it. It's not brought up. And I also don't think that the town is like ashamed either. No. Like I don't think it's something that, be it a town official, like someone in the government or the police or whatever, or just a regular citizen, I don't feel like it's something that we just don't talk about. Like it's a denial thing. I don't think it's that either. I think it's just not talked about for whatever reason. It's kind of weird to me that it's not, now that I really think about it. That's odd.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because like the news covers it, like on the anniversary, there will be like articles about it, and like kind of just like retrospectives on the case and kind of like updates about it. Like I think when the lead investigator like retired and someone else took over the investigation, like there was an article about that, but like that's like citywide news. Like this isn't like, it's not like like what you said, Speedway doesn't carry it as like something like a dark thing in the, I mean, it is a dark thing in the town's history, but it's not something that has completely like had a lasting like negative effect on the town, which you can take either way, like what have you. I will say, I remember in 2022 when Jess and I had just started dating, we went, because like she was into true crime and she had never been to Speedway before, so like we went to Speedway, and like I showed her around Speedway. and I showed her the building that is now demolished. But the building as it stood, where Burger Chef was in 1978. And when we got there, we didn't realize until, like, we walked around the building and we saw a bouquet of flowers at the back door. And we didn't realize until then that we were there on November 17th, 2022. And someone had gone to the site and left a bouquet of flowers. There was actually a YouTube video of them doing that, like, that Jess had just happened to find afterward. But, like, so it's not, like, publicly, like, something that the town carries, but there are people in the area who keep it in mind and keep it at the forefront of their minds enough to commemorate it on the anniversary of it. So, thought that was kind of interesting.
Right. And FYI, I can, like, so there's a walking trail behind my house. Mm-hmm. It used to be a railroad track called the B&O, Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. That was taken out, I mean, decades ago, well before we were even born. Mm-hmm. And it sat there for a long time, and now it became a walking trail, the B&O Trail. And literally, I can go out my back door, go through the gate in my fence, and walk up to the trail and walk back and forth. Well, that trail ends behind the Burger Chef building, or where it used to be. And we don't spend a ton of time on the trail. We walk it occasionally, but, like, we walked all the way down there one time, and it was at night. We always walked at night. Mm-hmm. And there's no lights back there. There's some other buildings too, some other businesses there, but it's creepy back there. Like it, and you know, it's an abandoned building, so of course there's going to be a creep factor to it, anyways. But yeah, I mean, like that's how close this is, and you know, like the most trafficked road in our town is the road that building is on. So. Again, it's just weird that it's not something that's front and center in the collective psyche of Speedway spark plugs, you know, the people in this town. And it's just kind of strange to think about.
Absolutely. And that was something that reminds me something about the documentary that, like, as soon as it started, like, one of the things that really drew me into it and really made me think, like, oh, this is going to be great, is for whatever reason, I know that because I knew that it was like an Australian production. Like it had, like, I think the Adelaide Film Festival screened it in Australia. The filmmakers are Australian. I was under the assumption that since it was going to be this kind of partially dramatized thing, I honestly thought that I did not expect to see Speedway in the film. Like, I did not expect it to be filmed, like, have those moments in Speedway. Like, there are multiple scenes where, like, we're just in, like, outside of Speedway High School, where we both graduated high school. And again, like, there's this surreal aspect to it as someone, like, as people who are very, very well acquainted with the town. Like, it's just it's so weird to see it on film, I guess. I'm not sure. I'm communicating that well enough as I should be, but I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yep. Another thing I want to talk about it, that you kind of touched on a little bit is this, I can vouch for it. This is incredibly well researched. Very, very thorough, very thoroughly researched, and with care. Like, even down to like the fact that that Mark wanted to go to the Galaxy, the under 21 nightclub across the street from Burger Chef. Like, I remember reading about that in the newspaper clippings and thinking, like, oh, there was an under 21 like nightclub across the street. That's interesting. Even down to, like, the reference to the Speedway police car having the bomb on it when the bomber stuff was happening. Like, it's just it's so well researched, and the dissemination of information is done so well to not be, again, it's not sensationalized. It's just delivering this information, and that's something that earned a ton of respect from me watching it, because it is in care of these victims in a very profound way.
For sure, yeah, and I hadn't considered that either. Watching it, that it is very, like you said, it's very centrally focused on these victims. You know, it's not a sensational, it's not sensationalized, like you said, and that was a good approach. You know, given that this is still a mystery, and we're talking about 4 kids. You know, it was well done in that regard. And yeah, for sure.
Yep. And another thing I really loved about it was the way that it delivers these theories. Like, there are title cards for each segment that's like the robber gang theory, the Forrester conundrum, the Speedway bomber, the eyewitness account, and the 40-year-old secret. So these 5 kind of theories or angles of the case are examined in these very interesting ways that aren't sensationalized. They're not. It's not like a case where like, we've kind of we've talked about like, how this doesn't work, so there's this other element to it that could be it. Like, if this was like if this was a docuseries on Netflix, like the cliffhanger of each episode would be like, and then then there was a bomber in Speedway. Could he do it? Like, it's like there's a little bit of that, but it's less sensationalized and more just like there's this other angle that we can explore here, which I thought was really well done.
Right, and then they go and interview the guy, and he's just a guy. Like, he's just very nondescript, and it's not like some sensationalized villainous thing. It's like he was just a dude. That was a portion of the documentary that I found really kind of fascinating, and I have my own biases with it as well. Like, it's an interesting thing, because I will say that they do talk a lot more about the bomber, a lot more of the aspects of the bomber than I expected them to. So basically, like, they talk about Julia Cyphers being murdered in July, and they talk about how Brett Kimberlin was involved with her daughter, and she wasn't accepting of the relationship. There's another element to it that I had read about that isn't touched on in the documentary, but basically Julia Cyphers' concerns with her daughter. I believe that her daughter, who Brett Kimberlin was involved with, had a daughter herself, and he would take her to like Mexico, like just him and her. And that just put up so many red flags with Julia Cyphers. And she was like putting her foot down, saying that, she was going to forbade her from seeing him because of her grandchild. And then the theory is that he hired the guy to kill her, and then he started setting the bombs to divert police attention away from that investigation. And it's so interesting to see it in the documentary, because like, I am of the thought, judging from everything that I've read, like, yeah, he's guilty. Like, it's just, he did it. Like, it's a foregone conclusion. Like, this is the way the narrative goes. This is how it is. And like, a couple interesting things about him as a person. He was arrested after it's referenced in this action is referenced in the documentary, but he would fly from Mexico to America. Like, he would smuggle marijuana, like by the pound, into the country. And I think there was like a sting operation where he was arrested for that. Like, he was charged with that, and that's what sent him to prison the first time. Then he was charged and convicted for the bombings. But they couldn't get any conviction or anything on Julia Cyphers' murder, because her husband, who is the only witness to the crime, passed away of cancer like very soon before he was able to testify. That it was that Bowman guy who Bowman guy? I can't remember if the guy's name was Bowman, I think. But anyway, like, that case got thrown out because their witness passed away. But it's interesting because, like, I've carried those thoughts in my brain for the last decade and change.
And like to see him, because that was one of the things where I was like, one of the things that I was like, when I was like researching, I was like, this guy's still alive, man. I'm going to have to like talk to him. But like, also he had like a claim to fame while he was in prison, during, in the 80s. Cause he claimed that he sold weed to Dan Quayle, like during, like he claimed it when he was nominated for vice president. And then also I believe there was another case where he like tried to solicit the murder of a judge or something while he was in prison, or something. So to actually see this guy in the documentary is like, I'm like, this is a far cry from like what I've seen. And like, I don't know if I believe him in this. I don't really believe him in this. But also like in the back of my mind, I was like, don't, like he references the Twilight Zone, and I was just like, don't invoke Rod Serling's name. Like, don't.
Oh shit.
So I don't know. Maybe that's a media bias on my part, but I remember like going through all of the articles and all of the information that I found. It was like, yeah, he doesn't seem like he's on the level. Like if he isn't responsible for these things, like he's very much the only person who could be responsible for them. So I don't know, but
wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you have any thoughts on any other thoughts on his, that section of the documentary?
Not really. My only issue with the whole Speedway bomber thing was that it seemed a little definitive. They were just like, like, okay, he didn't do it. Like he's not the Speedway murderer. He's not the Burger Chef murderer.
Yeah.
And just moved on from him very abruptly. And like, I thought it was really interesting. And like, I wanted to learn more and about him and everything. I guess it's not an issue because they're talking about this case, not the bombings. But he seemed like kind of, an eccentric, odd guy, but still just kind of a normal guy. He didn't strike me as a murderer per se. And again, he just didn't have like a villainous side to him at all. Not that I guess he had to, right. Maybe that's just projecting on my part, but anyways, yeah, it was interesting to see him on camera as well.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, it was interesting to see him, and I did really appreciate that. They talked about the bombing that left Carl DeLong an amputee. Like he lived the rest of his life with daily pain from the bombing. He's the one that kicked the bag away in the parking lot, and he ended up committing suicide because of the depression of it. And I appreciate that the documentary like references that and touched on that.
Yeah.
And yeah, also, yeah, Jesus. Just reading the Wikipedia page to refresh it, but like a jury ordered Kimberlin to pay the DeLong family $1.25 million for Carl DeLong's suicide and another $360,000 to Sandra DeLong for her injuries. In 1993, an appeals court overturned the $1.25 million for Carl DeLong's suicide, but upheld the damages awarded to Mrs. DeLong. In 1994, the Indiana Supreme Court overruled the appeals court ruling, restoring the original $1.6 million judgment. So that's good. I don't know if they ever got paid, but
right.
Actually, here we go. The next sentence. Kimberlin was paroled in November 1993 after serving 13 years. His parole was revoked and he was returned to prison in 1997 after not making court-ordered payments to the DeLong family, which resulted from their successful civil suit, and he was re-released in 2001.
Jeez.
So, interesting. But yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So the documentary does posit 5 different kind of segments of theories. We touched on the Speedway bomber. That's the 3rd one that's done. Do you want to run down the others? We can talk about each one.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so the first one that comes up is the one that the officer at the I think one of the detectives in it says that he's 99.9% sure is the case. It's the robber gang theory, where there was a group of like a syndicate or whatever of robbers who were robbing burger chefs and KFCs and much the same style. And they think it's just a botched robbery. They go into the theory talking about how one of the people in this group worked at a place in Avon that Jane Freet also worked in. And maybe he recognized her or she recognized him, and that's what escalated it to a kidnapping and then murder. How'd you feel about the way that this theory is presented to us and how it stacks up in the case?
I feel like each one of the theories had some merit, had at least some truth to it that made it plausible, but also relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, like that. The whole thing, Jane, may have recognized the guy, and that's what escalated it. Well, it's like, we don't know that that's what actually happened, and it's like. It's a good theory, but until there's anything that can prove that that's what happened, I just can't fully get on board with it. But I understand why it was a working theory, and it made sense. There's a lot of truth to the fact that there was this gang going around robbing burger chefs. It's like, well, this was a burger chef, and I mean. Again, that's a reasonable conclusion to draw. It's just there's not a lot of physical evidence for it, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it's a compelling idea.
Yeah, I agree. I like that this is the first one that they posit, because it is probably at least the way it's presented as the most viable one. Even if you take out the detective vouching for it as his belief of being 99.9% sure of it, it still is a compelling argument compared to the other ones. But it's also something else that we haven't really touched on yet, is I do also appreciate that this documentary does not give any ground to the Speedway Police Department of the era, because I'm thrilled that they included that detail, that was the I would say probably the reason why this was never solved is because the Speedway Police were called to the scene in the morning, saw that it was empty, the kids were missing, money was missing out of the safe, and everything was disheveled. They took it to mean that the kids decided to leave and take some money to go party or whatever, and they freaking let them clean up and open for breakfast. One of the biggest blunders of any any kind of true crime story that I'm aware of, but I'm glad that they referenced that numerous times, because that's something that is just unforgivable. It's so, and I mean, we're seeing this in with the hindsight of knowing what happened, but also with modern sensibilities of true crime forensics and danger of crime, which existed then, but I feel with the advent of the internet and community Facebook groups and the neighborhood or neighbor, whatever the app is, that's escalated there. But it's so frustrating that this could have had a different outcome. This could have had closure, and it doesn't now because of that.
Yeah, it is truly unforgivable. Just such a blatant miscarriage of justice, just so, wow. And part of me wonders, my talking earlier about how this is not a thing that looms over the town. I wonder if part of it is that there was thought that, you know, we don't want to besmirch our police department. You know,
Right.
we don't want to shine a light on the fact that they screwed up so bad.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that was initially, like through the 80s, was the attitude towards it, and so it didn't perpetuate into this local myth or this local legend or turn into a thing because of that. I mean, that's entirely possible.
Yeah.
Our town is incredibly proud of the fact that we have our own police department.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are in Marion County. We're embedded in the city of Indianapolis and Marion County, and there's other communities that don't have their own police department, but we do.
Yeah.
And there's no talk currently about it being dissolved into the city police department, but I'm sure that's come up over the last 50 years. But maybe it was, there was some effort to not talk about this case for that reason, to keep a positive light around the police department. I have no clue. That's entirely speculation on my part. But yeah, they screwed up. Like it is like it's not like somebody made a simple mistake. This is like a cardinal rule of investigations is you don't make any assumptions. You can't let any evidence be tampered with. And this is just bad. Just is blatant crime investigation, forensics 101. Don't do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I wonder also part of that, like, my assumption is that and maybe it was addressed in the documentary, I just missed it, but I'm sure that this is the case, that the reason why, like, the Indiana State Police had jurisdiction is because they were found in Johnson County. Like, they were, like, the scene of, like, their deaths were at Johnson County. And I think that's why the state police had it. But, like, I will say this also, like, just as a flex, I don't know if it's a flex, I don't know, but, like, I was like, this is a weird sentence, but also I think it speaks to how small Speedway is in the grand scheme of things in the greater, like, Indianapolis area. But like I don't know, like, I'm sure that there has been talk about absolving it and like whatever over the years, but like at my mom's funeral, I was talking to a high-ranking member of the Speedway Police Department, and from what I heard, like, it, crime's good in the town. Like, it is. It's going well. So
it's way down.
Yeah. Yep. So that's the weird flex. But
right.
But yeah. So anyway, I think that the robber gang theory is presented pretty well and makes the most sense, and I like that it's presented first because of that. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Do you want to talk about the Forrester conundrum?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the guy who was in prison for rape, for, like, he was serving a 90-some year sentence, and he started talking about how he was involved in the Burger Chef murders. He was hired as part of a crew to go basically... the idea was to squeeze out Jane for money that she owed for drugs. But he eventually also said that he was hired to kill her. Like, they were hired to kill her, specifically. And that's something that I found so interesting about the documentary, is that they really did examine, or really did, talk up this theory about Jane, being involved with drugs and drug dealers. Because that's something that I saw, like, whispers of in the newspaper clippings and on the online forums and on, like, the different, like I have a printout of, like, crimelibrary.com, which I think doesn't even exist anymore, that has like it's their like archived stuff of the Burger Chef case. And there was comments, like, from people, like, just people that's like, oh yeah, I went to high school with Jane, she was really into drugs, and, like, I went to high school with him, like, we were in the same class, and, like, just a bunch of stuff like that. But I like that it kind of expanded on that a little bit, because I only had heard, like, what is the equivalent of rumors and whispers in my research of it, and, like, they kind of go into a little bit more detail about it. It's still a little, like, foggy there, but I thought it was interesting to have, like, that further context for it.
Right. I feel like this is this theory was like the one with the least amount of support.
Yeah.
Because it's like almost entirely hearsay. I mean, there's, and not that eyewitness testimony, or not even eyewitness testimony, but character testimony is useless. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it should be a piece of connective evidence to hard evidence, right? It should connect a theory to hard evidence, and it doesn't do that, unfortunately.
Right.
I mean, not that there's nothing there. I think there could totally be something there, but it just seemed totally like, well, it's plausible that this happened because of this, again, hearsay about her, and it's not, there's nothing to suggest that this is for sure what happened. I think it's maybe the least plausible of the theories.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you there, because I think it's pretty damning when the detective says that, like, he believes that I think Daniel or Donald Forrester, I'm not sure of the first name, but Forrester was fed this information, basically. Like, he was in a room with like a bunch of stuff about the case in front of him. Like, it was kind of sloppily done in that respect. But yeah, it's what I found most compelling and interesting about that section of the documentary was the footage of him speaking, like, from the 80s when he is like being interviewed by the detectives. I thought that was really interesting. And like also the commentary about, them leading him with the questions, like, okay, well, like, he says that he stabbed Jane once, and so they asked, like, who stabbed her the second time, instead of like getting more information from him, which that's also just a grim detail of the story that that I find, like, that is kind of haunted me. Like, it haunted me when I started researching it, and it's kind of like, I'll think about it occasionally, is just the fact that she was stabbed twice in the chest, and like, on the second stabbing, the handle broke off and the blade was in her chest. And that's like, it breaks my heart, because like, that's horrific, and there's just a level of disdain for human life in that's really, really upsetting.
Yeah, it feels personal. It's not that there's any good way to die, I guess, when you're being murdered, but it's one thing to be shot in the head and another to be slowly stabbed to death. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was Forster the guy that there was an interesting piece of evidence that I remember that seemed a little, not a little bit glossed over, but not dwelled on enough, was there, there was a gun somewhere. Did they find a gun at the Burger Chef building?
I don't believe so. No, there was he had Forrester had said that he had like a 22 when the gun that was used was a 38.
Okay. And didn't they find bullets or shell casings from a gun at someone's house who lives in Johnson County?
I don't think it's someone's house. I think it was at like in the woods in Johnson County, I think.
Okay. I thought they said they found like shell casings at someone's home, like in a burn barrel or something. I don't know. Maybe
they might have. I
was like, well, how the hell is that a thing?
Yeah. There was also something I neglected to mention. The robber gang theory is that the two like people that were suspected of being there that were part of that gang like lived in like minutes away from where the bodies were found too, so that also lends a little credence to that. But we already talked about the Speedway bomber, but there was like the eyewitness account is another section of it that kind of folds into the 40-year-old secret. That's the end of it, I think. But I do want to mention the eyewitness account. Like earlier in the film, there's these two people that are getting high outside of the Burger Chef, and they saw the two men, and they were like, their testimony is what brought out like the 3D bust of them and the sketches and everything. Something that's not mentioned in the documentary that I found in my research that I thought was really interesting, because it's like, this is 1978, like crime, like research and detective work. But I believe those two people were hypnotized for their testimony, for their descriptions. Like, they brought in a psychic or whoever to hypnotize them to get the descriptions. So that's kind of wild.
Interesting. Yeah, they did not bring that up in the documentary.
They did not. They did not.
Wild.
Yeah. But what did you think of, I guess the eyewitness account, the kind of the different, I think Al Pruitt was his name, that he spoke very, with such conviction that it was like two guys that he knew that he saw. And then the kids kind of dismantle that a little bit as they go over the details. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
That one, again, how reliable is eyewitness testimony?
Yeah.
And that guy, the Pruitt guy, there's a lot of, he seems like a personality.
Mm-hmm.
He had some legal trouble, and he again, there's some character issues with him that call into credibility his ability to be a witness.
Mm-hmm.
But not to say that he was totally unconvincing. I mean, I think he's totally convinced that it was this guy, these two guys that he knew. And I, doesn't his story kind of tie into the last theory, the 40-year-old secret, a little bit?
I think so, because he said that he saw two people that he knew. I want to say one of them was Jeff Reed, who is the subject of the 40-year-old secret. But the other one I want to talk about real quick is Tim something. From what I understand, I think that Timothy Willoughby. Those, I think those are relatively new theories from like past the time I was researching it, because I had never heard anything about this. But Timothy Willoughby, if I remember correctly from the documentary, like he's believed to have been killed like that year. Like he's believed to have been dead. Like his body has never been found. Like he is never, like he's gone. And that's kind of wild to me as well, since we don't have the context for that, but like we have that hearsay, that secondary and tertiary, like accounts of people that say like, oh, we heard them boasting about this, and like, oh, she would, like his girlfriend was talking about it in the van, and then they threw her out because they were going to kill her, and then they killed him, and just I think that's where the oh, that's right. Okay, now I'm remembering that. I think is where they found the firearm, because they killed her, and she was found. I think she was found in like a sealed barrel. Is that what you were thinking about? Yeah.
Yeah. And was there like a ballistics match between her and bullets found in the victims of the Burger Chef murders?
I don't know. I don't even think the documentary really addresses that. I don't know. I would assume that there was testing done, but I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Can't remember.
Yeah, but it's an interesting part of it. But I like that section really plays up the unreliable narration of the Al Pruitt character person, his testimony, but also works to figure like how it pieces together. Like he said that the van he saw was orange, but it was yellow in another account. It was burnt. It was rust colored in another one. And then like we get that really interesting scene where they're kind of going over the notes, and they're like, oh, these theories feed together. They're the same theory, because he saw it in a certain light, and the light from the restaurant, from like the Dunkin' Donuts or from Burger Chef, like cast it in a different light and showed it like to be orange. And it was really interesting. But yeah, but the 40-year-old secret is the one that's kind of the showstopper, the end one that's pretty compelling, pretty convincing, that this guy Jeff Reed was the one responsible for the killings, because he allegedly confided in a friend of his who speaks in the documentary about it, who goes into detail about what he did and how he killed them and everything. how do you feel about that theory and the way it's presented in the documentary?
I mean, it's really compelling, and I think it's probably the best theory because it's the only like reliable confession. You know, the Forster conundrum or whatever, that one is pretty well defunct. Like that's not a usable confession, and it's not reliable for multiple reasons. Now this one, you know, of course the issue is it's, you know, kind of it's not straight from the horse's mouth, you know, so to speak. So there's that, but you know, I don't know that there's any reason to doubt what that guy was telling us. You know, I think he's probably telling the truth, that his friend confessed to this murder, Mike Reed, or is that his name? Jeff Reed.
Jeff, yeah.
I think he's telling the truth. I think that confession probably actually happened. You know, I have no reason to doubt it. But you know, the guy's Jeff Reed died like not recently. It was a while ago, right? Like he's been dead for a while.
I think he died he may have died in 2011, or I might be confusing him with someone else in the end kind of the documentary. But I think it was 2011.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I mean, the truth died with him. You know, what actually happened. But you know, he had a van that matched that description, and there's some other witnesses who saw that van and saw a guy that fit his description driving that van in the area right around that time. And like that's a couple of, you know, that's two different witnesses piecing together, plus a confession. Like this is, to me, this is the most compelling thing. And I think, you know, while it can't be 100% concrete, this is what happened. I think for purposes of closure, I don't know if the victims, you know, the families of these victims are accepting of that, to say, okay, Jeff Reed killed my sister, killed my son, killed, you know, I don't know if they're willing to accept that. That can only be decided by them. You know, at this point, I don't know that we're going to have a closed case saying, hey, this is what happened. But what is important is the closure of these families. And if they're willing to accept it, that's what matters. And I'd be curious to know if how they feel about it. And you know, because again, that's what really matters. So, but yeah, I mean, it was interesting to hear that guy. Of all the witnesses we heard from, it was interesting how matter of fact he was talking about it. And he was like, you know, I've held this secret for 40 years, and you know, I don't know that he said he feels guilty or anything, but
yeah,
you know, I believed him, I guess. And you know, that's not a good, that's not a compelling thing to say, right?
Sure.
Like, oh, I believe the guy. Like, well, good for you. I fucking don't, right?
Right.
So yeah, but I feel like, you know, I can only comment on what I feel, and he just seemed credible to me. But yeah, it's probably the closest thing we have to the truth.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you there. I don't know if I would say that it's a compelling theory. It's a compelling way to end the run of theories. Like it has like strong backing. Like there's also that video, I think, of who's believed to be Jeff Reed, like a few days later, like with the van in the background as he's walking into the I think it's the Dunkin' Donuts, and he's like looking away from the camera because it's like news crews and stuff, which is like, that's, again, it's circumstantial stuff. It's not like a bullet, it's not the smoking gun that this case needs or anything, but it's something to kind of tie into things.
Right.
Another interesting thing that isn't mentioned in the documentary, there's just from my knowledge, is that in the early 2000s, I think, one of the articles that popped up about hoping to get renewed interest in the Burger Chef case, the state police were they had given out decks of cards to prisoners across the state. and the decks of cards had like details of crimes that were unsolved on them, and Burger Chef was included in that. I don't think it yielded any new information or anything, but I just thought that was an interesting kind of tactic to try to get renewed interest or get new leads on cold cases. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that we can kind of wind down a bit here. I want to kind of circle back and talk about the filmmaking itself, and kind of close out on talking about the talking heads of the family members as well. Did anything stick out to you, Tiny, about like in those instances of the movie that you want to comment on?
Yeah, I mean, the main, and I wish I could remember the names and stuff. But I think it was it Jane's sister who was kind of featured the most?
I want to say it was Ruth's sister.
Ruth's sister.
Yeah,
that's right. Ruth's sister. She was totally an emotional anchor for the movie, and I thought
absolutely,
that was the emotional anchor of the movie for me, of the documentary. And I thought she was, obviously she wasn't giving a performance, but
right.
like just the way that she was able to articulate how she feels about this, and how this is, I think it was her, just the way they filmed her and the way that she articulated everything was almost a way to ground this documentary and say, like you and I have been saying throughout this is not just some fun mystery to solve. This is not a Hardy Boys novel. This is, they killed my sister. Like I and that's just, again, totally grounds it and makes it real. And from a creative standpoint, it helps invest your audience. And they kept going back to her. That's the other thing I liked about that. It wasn't just bring her up one time when you're talking about Ruth and then you move on. Like, no, she was featured throughout the entire documentary.
Yes.
And again, that's the person I would be curious to see a follow-up with, to see like, how does she feel about this? Does she have any sense of closure? Does she feel any kind of way about the information that was uncovered? And the conclusion of the documentary, I'd be very curious to know. But yeah, I think that was the most compelling family member that we really heard from, and I appreciated and really respected her ability to articulate all that throughout this movie.
Yeah, same here. Definitely the emotional crux of the documentary, especially at the end when she's reading from Ruth's diary. That's the part where I started really welling up and really started to cry, when she's talking about how Ruth was excited to turn 18 in a month, and she was excited to be an adult, and more responsibilities and everything. And then she reads the last entry in the diary, and then she says that their mother added the sentence, Ruth didn't make it to 18, and like, that just brings home just tragedy of this whole thing. It's heartbreaking in a multitude of ways.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yep. And it happened in our hometown, Tiny.
It sure did. Did.
Yep. So yeah, anything else? The depictions of Speedway in it. I did want to mention, I noticed that a lot of the footage seemed to be shot in 2018 for the 40th anniversary, and I did not know that there was a tree planting ceremony and there's a plaque at Leonard Park. So I might run over there and check it out.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. Yep. So I'm curious how it went to getting a 2024 release or 2023 festival release and 2024 main release. But yeah, I did like that was included, like that there was those scenes of people gathering at Leonard Park and commemorating it that way for the anniversary. I thought that was a nice touch. I do wish there was a little bit more of that, like more showcase of that, but I'm glad it was there. So
right. Yeah, me too.
Yep. All right. Well, are there any parting thoughts on the Speedway Murders, Tiny?
No, I think just to kind of reiterate, I'm really shocked and kind of blown away by the creativity of this documentary. I was so really thankful that this was not just a flash in the pan or just some thoughtless, like, hey, this is a mystery. True crime's big. Let's just make this real quick. Like they cared. I think the filmmakers cared about this story and took care of it. And that comes across in the creative process for this documentary and the care that it was handled with. I really appreciate that. And it's just well done on so many levels. And I'm really thankful for that.
Same here. And it is a completely unique documentary experience. I think the level of care and going through the credits, I think before the main credits started, it says this film is dedicated to the memories of Jane, Ruth, Dan, and Mark, and every other victim of unsolved crimes. It comes through in the documentary so beautifully. And again, just to reiterate, as we kind of wind down, the filmmaking style, the style that they'd use, the unique kind of approach that they took to this worked incredibly well. I rated it 5 stars on Letterboxd. It's it was a profound and beautiful documentary. And like you said, I'm also very thankful that this was made and it's now on a platform that people can see it on Hulu, and they can see it and learn about this case and remember these kids in their own ways after they learn about them. So I think it's a good thing.
For sure. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for this bonus episode of the Obsessive Viewer podcast. If you liked listening to this, give us a follow, give us a subscribe, check out our other episodes, our other shows and everything. I'll say that whole spiel at the end. But also, since this is releasing on November 17th, the anniversary of the crime at the subject of the Speedway Murders documentary, I do encourage you to check it out. Research, look up, watch the documentary and look up the true stuff behind it, and kind of familiarize yourself with it, learn about it, and just spend some time learning about it. So I would recommend it. All right. Well, that will do it for this special bonus episode of The Obsessive Viewer. As always, thank you so much for listening, and make sure to follow the show on social media and subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast app. Also, check out Obsessive Viewer Podcast's other shows, Tower Junkies, a Stephen King podcast, hosted by Tiny and myself, and Anthology, the Twilight Zone and Classic Sci-Fi podcast, hosted by me. Next time on the podcast, since we're recording this a little bit in advance, I'm a little hesitant to say what we're doing next week because I'm not sure, but I think on the docket is a review of Red 1, which I don't know what the secondary review will be, but Red 1 certainly looks like a movie. So join the show next week for that. Until then, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. And thank you, Tiny.
Thanks, bud.
And now, enjoy this short clip from a recent Patreon-exclusive episode. For the full episode and more Patreon-exclusive content, sign up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. But I could kind of get behind that as it being a nostalgia piece, it being something that's supposed to invigorate a certain demographic into thinking the good old days and what it's like to be in America in this time. I can understand that if that's what it was going for. But I feel like Robert Zemeckis was wanting to do something that was maybe more profound, but couldn't find that profound nature in the movie, in the story. He was just not equipped for it. And because of that, it is kind of a jumbled mess in a lot of places. Thank you for listening to the Obsessive Viewer podcast. This episode was produced and edited by me, Matt Hurt. If you have feedback, thoughts on our episodes, or just want to connect, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. For more information on this show, including a full archive of our episodes and show notes, visit obsessiveviewer.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please give us a follow on social media and subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. Also, consider rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible to help increase our visibility and grow our community. If you want to support the show and get early access to new episodes, as well as a steady stream of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. For information on more podcasts presented by obsessiveviewer.com, visit obsessiveviewer.com/podcasts. Our theme song is A Little Mad Sometimes by As Good As It Gets. For more of their music, check them out on Spotify and at asgoodasitgetsmusic.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Get up to 2 months of free podcasting service with Libsyn. Check out the show notes for your promo code to get started podcasting today.